Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I am Bradford, 32 years old, a successful IT manager who still feels like a failure around his father. At our latest family dinner, Dad looked at my sister Lisa with pride, then turned to me with that familiar disappointment. "Your sister earned everything on her own. Unlike you," he laughed. Something inside me finally broke. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and replied, "Then I'll stop sending you money. Now it's her problem." Dad turned pale, confusion washing over his face. "What money?" If you've ever been compared unfairly to siblings, let me know where you're watching from. And subscribe to see how I finally stood up for myself. After years of being the family shadow, growing up as Bradford Thompson meant living in the shadow of expectations I could never fulfill. From my earliest memories, my father Gerald was a larger-than-life figure in our small town of Oak Ridge. 6'3", broad-shouldered, with a booming laugh that commanded attention in any room. He had been the star quarterback at State University back in the 80s, nearly went pro before a knee injury ended those dreams. But in his mind, he never really left the field. I was the opposite of everything my father valued. While he thrived on physical prowess and social dominance, I was the quiet kid who preferred taking apart computers to throwing footballs. By age 10, I had built my first basic program. By 12, I was troubleshooting our neighbors' technology problems. None of this registered as achievement in my father's eyes. "Bradford, get outside. You're wasting your life in front of that screen," he would bellow, dragging me from my projects to toss a football I inevitably dropped. Each fumble reinforced his disappointment. Each missed catch another failure tallied in his mental scorebook. My sister Lisa, 2 years older, was everything I wasn't. Athletic, socially confident, academically gifted, and beautiful in that effortless way that seemed to make life easier. She played volleyball, ran track, maintained a perfect grade point average, and still had time to be homecoming queen. Dad beamed at her games, shouting encouragement, swelling with pride at every trophy she brought home. "Watch your sister, Brad," he would say. "That's how you make something of yourself." My mother Jane was the family peacekeeper. Short with warm brown eyes and infinite patience, she would find me after particularly difficult encounters with Dad. She understood my passion for technology wasn't just a phase or waste of time. "Your father loves you," she would whisper as she sat beside me in my room, watching me work on some circuit board or code. "He just doesn't understand this world. Someday he will see how special your gifts are." Mom was the buffer between Dad's expectations and my reality. She would highlight my accomplishments at dinner, trying to translate my technological victories into terms Dad might appreciate. She attended the small technology fairs where I displayed projects, taking photos and genuinely trying to understand my explanations. When I was 14, I developed a program that helped local businesses track inventory more efficiently. The local newspaper ran a small story about the teen tech prodigy. Mom framed it and hung it proudly in the hallway. Dad walked past it every day, without comment. Everything changed when Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer when I was 15. The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, the smell of antiseptic, and the gradual dimming of the light in her eyes. She fought hard, but by my 16th birthday, she was gone. Her absence left a vacuum in our home. There was no one to translate between Dad's world and mine, no one to buffer his disappointment or highlight my achievements. Our family dynamic shifted dramatically. Dad retreated into work and his memories of glory days, while Lisa threw herself into even more activities, as though achievement could outrun grief. I disappeared into technology more completely than ever. Code made sense when nothing else did. Computers were predictable, logical, and never disappointed. I built a small server in our basement, taught myself 3 programming languages, and started taking college-level computer science courses online. The spring of my senior year in high school, I received a prestigious scholarship for computer science. The ceremony was scheduled on a Friday evening. I sent Dad an invitation weeks in advance, reminded him several times. He said he would try to make it. The night of the ceremony, I sat alone among families beaming with pride as students were called up one by one. When my name echoed through the auditorium, I walked across the stage, shook hands with the dean, and scanned the audience. Dad's seat remained empty. I later learned he had chosen to attend Lisa's volleyball tournament instead. That night, I sat in my room staring at the scholarship certificate. It would pay for my entire education at one of the best technology programs in the country. It represented validation from experts that what I was doing mattered. But somehow, without Dad's acknowledgement, it felt hollow. I remember placing the certificate carefully in a folder and making a promise to myself. One day, I would achieve enough that even my father couldn't ignore it. One day, he would have to see me for who I was, not who he wanted me to be. One day, I would make him proud. It was a childish dream, perhaps. But it was the thread I clung to as I prepared to leave for college. Moving 1,000 miles away from the house where I had always felt like a stranger, I believed education and success would finally bridge the gap between my father and me. How wrong I was. My college years passed in a blur of late nights coding, early morning classes, and weekends spent in hackathons. While other students partied, I built my future one line of code at a time. The University of California's computer science program was everything I had hoped for: challenging, cutting edge, and full of people who thought like me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the odd one out. My skills were valued, my passion understood. Professors took interest in my projects, and fellow students sought my help. The validation I had craved from my father came instead from mentors who recognized my potential. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in computer science and data analysis. 3 major tech companies offered me positions before I even removed my cap and gown. I chose TechVision, a rising star in cloud infrastructure with headquarters in San Francisco. The starting salary was $90,000 more money than I had ever imagined earning, especially at 22. My first apartment was a tiny studio in Oakland. Nothing fancy, but all mine. I bought secondhand furniture, set up a powerful home workstation, and settled into adult life with cautious optimism. For the first 6 months, I barely spoke to my family. Dad called on Christmas and my birthday, brief conversations that felt like obligations. Lisa was busy with her fashion design degree in New York, her Instagram showcasing a glamorous life of runway shows and industry parties. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday night in October when my phone rang, Dad's name flashing on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Our last conversation had ended with his usual comparison of my computer job to Lisa's creative career. But something made me pick up. His voice sounded different, smaller somehow. The manufacturing plant where he'd worked as a supervisor since leaving his brief coaching career had abruptly closed. After 20 years, he was unemployed at 54, with few prospects in our dwindling factory town. "I'm not calling for help," he said gruffly. "Just thought you should know." I asked about his savings, his pension. The answers were grim. The company's financial troubles had been building for years, and much of what he'd been counting on had evaporated. He had the house, nearly paid off, but property taxes, utilities, and basic living expenses would quickly drain what little he had set aside. "Lisa's really taking off in New York," he added, his voice brightening. "She's been featured in some important magazine. Says she might have her own line soon." Even now, in crisis, he turned to thoughts of Lisa. I swallowed my frustration and asked practical questions. Did he have health insurance? Had he filed for unemployment? What was his monthly budget? The picture that emerged was bleak. My father, the proud ex-athlete who had always seemed invincible, was on the verge of financial ruin. And Lisa, for all her apparent success, wasn't in a position to help. Or perhaps wasn't aware of how bad things had become. After we hung up, I stayed awake all night, running calculations. The next morning, I set up an automatic monthly transfer from my account to his $1,500, enough to cover his mortgage and basic expenses. But I knew he would never accept direct help from me, the son he had always seen as inadequate. I created an elaborate system. The money went first into a separate account I established, then transferred to him with paperwork, making it appear to come from a sports legacy fund for former collegiate athletes facing hardship. I forged documents, created a fake website, and even set up an email address that would automatically respond to inquiries. It was technically fraud, but I couldn't see another option. My father received the first payment 2 weeks later. He called me, voice thick with relief, to share the amazing news about this program he'd been accepted into. They said my college career qualified me. Can you believe it? All these years later, and playing ball is still paying off. The irony was painful. My computer skills, the very abilities he had dismissed, had created this lifeline he now depended on. Each month, I lived frugally to ensure that payment continued. I skipped vacations, brought lunch from home, and kept my studio apartment even as my salary increased. Meanwhile, my career at TechVision accelerated. Within 2 years, I was leading a team developing security protocols for banking applications. By year 3, I was promoted to senior developer with a substantial raise. I finally moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood and bought my first new car, modest choices that allowed me to continue supporting Dad while building my own financial security. Lisa's trajectory proved more complicated than her Instagram suggested. Through occasional family video calls, I noticed her changing addresses frequently, her enthusiastic updates about her fashion career growing vaguer. She rarely visited home, always citing some critical industry event or deadline. In our 5th year post-college, I was promoted again to development manager. The promotion came with stock options and another significant salary increase. I bought a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, invested in retirement accounts, and still managed to increase Dad's monthly support to $2,000. All the while, Dad remained oblivious to the true source of his financial stability. In our infrequent conversations, he continued to minimize my career achievements while exaggerating Lisa's. Every call included some variation of "your sister is really making something of herself," or "Lisa's really earned her success." The narrative he constructed bore little resemblance to reality. I was now managing 30 developers and overseeing projects worth millions of dollars. Lisa, from what little I could gather, was working as an assistant at a small fashion house, her dreams of her own line unfulfilled. I never corrected him. Part of me hoped that someday he would see the truth without my having to point it out. Another part, a part I wasn't proud of, took bitter satisfaction in knowing how wrong he was. The checks kept going out, month after month, year after year. The lies accumulated like sediment, hardening into a foundation our relationship now rested upon. By the 7th year, the monthly transfers had become background noise in my life, just another bill automatically paid. I rarely thought about the deception anymore. My focus had shifted to my own goals, leading larger projects, investing wisely, building genuine friendships with colleagues who valued me for who I actually was. Then Lisa announced she was coming home, supposedly to celebrate her fashion collection launch. And everything I had carefully constructed began to unravel. The first sign of trouble arrived in a group text. "Coming home next week. Can't wait to see everyone and share my big news. Oxo Lisa." I was in the middle of a critical project meeting when it came through, but my stomach immediately knotted. In 7 years, Lisa had returned home only for Christmas visits, each one briefer than the last. A spontaneous visit meant something had changed. I called Dad that evening to confirm he'd received the message. His voice brimmed with excitement. "Your sister's finally coming to show us her collection. She's been working on it for years. This is her big break." That was news to me. In our infrequent texts, Lisa had never mentioned a collection nearing completion. Her social media had grown increasingly sparse with actual work examples, focusing instead on parties and lifestyle shots. She asked if I could pick her up from the airport. Dad continued. I told her you could do it. You have that flexible computer job, and I'm interviewing for the supervisor position at Wilson's Manufacturing. The dismissive way he said flexible computer job as if I answered emails in pajamas instead of managing millions in technology assets should have bothered me. But I was more concerned about his job prospect. Wilson's? I thought they weren't hiring until next quarter. They moved things up, he said vaguely. Should know by next week. I agreed to pick up Lisa, curiosity overriding my reluctance. As I drove to the airport the following Tuesday, I reflected on our complicated relationship. We had never been close, separated by Dad's obvious favoritism and our different interests. Yet we had never been openly hostile, either just orbiting different worlds. The woman who walked through the arrival gate barely resembled my memories of Lisa. Gone was the confident athlete with the easy smile. This Lisa looked exhausted, her designer clothes slightly worn at the edges, her smile too bright and too quick. She carried a single suitcase and a garment bag, surprisingly little for someone supposedly bringing a collection to show. Bradford. She threw her arms around me with unusual enthusiasm. You look so corporate now. Nice watch. Is that a Rolex? It wasn't. It was a moderately priced timepiece I'd bought to celebrate my last promotion. Just a Seiko. How was your flight? The drive home became her monologue about New York. The connections she'd made, designers she'd met, exclusive parties she'd attended. But when I asked specific questions about her work or the collection she was supposedly launching, her answers grew vague. It's all very preliminary, she said, waving her hand dismissively. But the interest is huge, just waiting on final investors. Dad had prepared for her visit, like a returning, conquering hero. The house maintained largely through my hidden support was spotless. Her childhood bedroom had fresh linens and flowers. He had even hung a banner reading "Congratulations, Lisa," across the living room. That first dinner set the pattern for an increasingly uncomfortable week. Dad fawned over Lisa, hanging on every name she dropped, every anecdote about Fashion Week or industry insiders. He barely acknowledged my presence except to ask if I could stay longer, take more time off, be more supportive of your sister's big moment. By the third day, I had grown suspicious enough to do some research. A quick investigation revealed Lisa had been let go from her assistant position at Mercer Designs 6 months earlier. Her Instagram posts from exclusive events were mostly from press areas or public showcases, not the VIP access she implied. Her supposed fashion connections were primarily low-level assistants like she had been. The collection consisted of exactly 5 sketches and 2 partially completed dresses she finally showed us on day 4. They were good. Lisa had always been talented, but nowhere near a marketable collection. The interest from investors was a single email from a small boutique owner saying they might consider carrying some pieces if she completed the line. Yet Dad remained thoroughly convinced of her imminent superstardom. When I gently suggested she might need more time to develop her collection, he snapped. Your sister knows the industry. She's put in the work. Not everyone sits behind a screen all day. Lisa shot me a look, part triumph, part guilt. She knew I knew, but she wasn't ready to give up the adoration. The situation deteriorated further when Dad began discussing financial support for her breakthrough. Over dinner on the 5th night, he announced he was investing in her future. I've been blessed with this support from the Sports Legacy Fund, he explained. I can spare some to help Lisa get her line produced. It's what family does. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The money I had sent to support him, money I had sacrificed vacations and luxuries for, was now being redirected to fund Lisa's fiction. How much are you thinking? I asked, struggling to keep my voice neutral. 20,000 should get her started, Dad said confidently. I've been saving most of what comes in each month. $20,000. More than 10 months of my payments. Money meant to keep him secure, not bankroll Lisa's delusions. That seems like a lot, I ventured. Maybe start smaller until there's actual investor interest? Lisa's eyes narrowed. Some people believe in me, Brad. Not everyone needs to see a business plan and ROI projections. That's right, Dad nodded. Your sister's an artist. She works from passion, not spreadsheets. The conversation moved on, but something had shifted in me. For 7 years, I had supported my father without acknowledgement. I had built a successful career despite his dismissal of my field. I had maintained the lie because it seemed easier than confronting decades of emotional neglect. But watching him prepare to hand over my hard-earned money to support Lisa's fantasies rather than facing reality broke something fundamental in my understanding of our family. The next morning, I found Lisa alone in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. Dad had gone to a neighbor's to help with some yard work. How long have you been unemployed? I asked without preamble. She flinched but recovered quickly. I'm not unemployed. I'm launching my own line. Lisa, I checked. Mercer Designs let you go 6 months ago. Your apartment sublease in Queens ended 4 months ago. Where have you been living? Her carefully constructed facade cracked. Friends' couches, mostly. It's just temporary, until the collection launches. There is no collection launch, is there? She stared at her coffee for a long moment. There could be. With the right support. I just need time and resources. So you came home to get money from Dad. I came home because I had nowhere else to go. The words burst out of her. Do you know how hard it is out there? How competitive? I tried, Brad. For years, I tried. For a moment, I saw past my resentment to my sister. Really saw her. She was scared, failing, and falling back on the one strategy that had always worked, being Dad's golden child. Why didn't you just ask me for help directly? I said. I would have helped you. She laughed bitterly. Ask my little brother for a handout? Dad would never let me live it down. You know how he is about you. Actually, I don't think you do, I replied. But before I could say more, the front door opened, and Dad's voice called out cheerfully. The moment for honesty passed, and we slipped back into our assigned roles. But the confrontation was coming. I could feel it building like a thunderstorm, the air growing heavy with unspoken truths. The breaking point came on Sunday evening. Dad had insisted on a special dinner to celebrate Lisa's last night home before she returned to New York to finalize her collection launch. He grilled steaks, made her favorite potato salad, and even bought an expensive bottle of champagne, an extravagance that made me wince, knowing the true state of his finances. I had been quiet most of the evening, wrestling with whether to expose the years of deception or let the charade continue. Part of me wanted to protect Dad from the humiliation of learning he had been dependent on the son he dismissed. Another part desperately wanted recognition for the sacrifices I had made. Lisa dominated the conversation with increasingly elaborate plans for her non-existent fashion empire. Flagship stores in Manhattan, celebrity clients, Fashion Week appearances. With each fabrication, Dad's chest swelled further with pride. I always knew you had it in you, he beamed, refilling her champagne glass. You're a Thompson. We don't just succeed, we excel. Then he turned to me, his expression shifting subtly. Your sister has such drive, such ambition. That's why she's making these big moves while you're still doing the same computer stuff year after year. I took a careful sip of water. I'm actually leading the company's new cybersecurity division now. We just secured a $30 million contract with a major bank. Dad waved dismissively. Sure. Sounds complicated. But Lisa here is creating something real. Something people can see and touch. That takes a special kind of talent. Lisa at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. She studied her plate intently. I suppose so, I said, struggling to maintain composure. And she's done it all on her own, Dad continued, warming to his favorite theme. No handouts. No shortcuts. Just hard work. And Thompson. Determination. Lisa's knuckles whitened around her fork. She knew what was coming. Your sister earned everything on her own, unlike you. Dad laughed, taking another drink of champagne. You had all those scholarships handed to you. Lisa fought for every opportunity. Something inside me finally broke. 7 years of silent support. 7 years of dismissal and comparison. 7 years of lies. I set down my napkin carefully, leaned back in my chair, and looked my father directly in the eyes. Then I'll stop sending you money, I said quietly. Now it's her problem. The dining room fell silent. Dad's smile froze, then slowly faded into confusion. What money? He asked. The $1,500 every month for the first 3 years. Then $2,000 monthly for the past 4 years. The money you think comes from the Sports Legacy Fund. I made air quotes around the fictional organization's name. Dad's face drained of color. What are you talking about? There is no Sports Legacy Fund, Dad. That money comes from me. Has always come from me. I set up the fake organization because I knew you'd never accept help from your disappointing son who just plays with computers all day. Lisa's eyes widened. Brad, wait. But I was beyond stopping. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and slid it across the table. See for yourself. Every month for 7 years. Over $160,000 total. Money I sent. So you wouldn't lose the house after the plant closed. Money you're now planning to give to Lisa for a fashion collection that doesn't exist. Dad stared at the phone, his hands trembling slightly as he scrolled through month after month of transfers. His face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions, confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally, a dawning horror. Why would you do this? He whispered. Because you're my father, I said simply. Because Mom would have wanted me to help. Because I kept hoping someday you'd see me really see me, without comparing me to Lisa. But that day never came. I turned to my sister. And you. I know you're unemployed. I know there's no collection, no investors, no Fashion Week appearances. You came home because you had nowhere else to go. Dad's head snapped up. What? Lisa's composure finally broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I tried, Dad. For years, I tried to make it work. But New York is brutal. For every success, there are thousands of failures. I became one of the failures. The truth, once started, couldn't be contained. Lisa admitted everything. The lost jobs, the couch surfing, the fabricated social media presence designed to maintain the illusion of success. Dad sat immobile, his world crumbling around him. The golden daughter revealed as struggling and deceptive. The overlooked son exposed as the family's actual provider. The narrative he had constructed and clung to for decades dissolving before his eyes. All this time, he said hoarsely, I've been living on your charity. Not charity, I corrected. Family support. The same support you're offering Lisa. The difference is, I never expected recognition or praise. I just wanted you to stop making me feel worthless. I stood up, suddenly needing space. The room felt too small. The air too thick, with decades of unspoken resentments and misplaced pride. I'm going back to San Francisco tomorrow, I said. I've arranged for one final transfer enough to cover next month's expenses. After that, you'll need to figure things out. Maybe Lisa can get a job locally and contribute. Maybe that Wilson manufacturing position will come through. Bradford. Wait, Dad began. But I was already walking toward the door. I've waited 7 years, Dad. I'm done waiting for you to see me. I spent that night in a hotel, ignoring the barrage of texts and calls from both of them. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my complete truth to my father. The relief was palpable but accompanied by a deep sadness for what our relationship might have been without the weight of his expectations and my resentment. As I boarded the plane back to San Francisco the next morning, I didn't know if I had just destroyed my family or taken the first painful step towards something more authentic. All I knew was that I couldn't continue living a lie, financing my own diminishment. It was time for all of us to face reality. The first week after I returned to San Francisco passed in a blur of work and emotional exhaustion. My phone continued to light up with messages from Dad and Lisa, but I wasn't ready to engage. I needed space to process what had happened and what it meant for our future. At work, I threw myself into the new cybersecurity division with renewed focus. My team noticed the change, the longer hours, the intensity, the lack of personal conversation. Thomas, my deputy manager and closest work friend, finally cornered me in the break room. "Either you've discovered caffeine for the first time, or something's seriously wrong," he said, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. "Want to talk about it?" Something about his straightforward concern broke through my defenses. Over the next hour, I unloaded the whole story. The years of financial support, the deception, the confrontation. Thomas listened without judgment, asking occasional clarifying questions. "So what happens now?" he asked when I finished. I shrugged. "I honestly don't know. Part of me wants to never speak to them again. Another part feels guilty for cutting them off." "Family is complicated," Thomas said. "But it sounds like you did what you had to do. The question is whether this is the end or just a painful new beginning." His words stayed with me as the days turned into weeks. I established new routines that didn't involve checking in on Dad's finances or making sure the monthly transfer went through. I started sleeping better. I even joined a local hiking group, something I'd been meaning to do for years but never found time for. A month after the confrontation, I finally listened to my voicemails. Dad had left several, each more contrite than the last. The most recent was different, less desperate, more thoughtful. "Bradford, I understand if you never want to speak to me again." His voice was steadier than I expected. "But I want you to know, I've started seeing a therapist. Dr. Marshall says, I've been compensating for my own failures through Lisa, and punishing you for succeeding where I couldn't. I don't know if that's true, but I'm trying to figure it out. I miss you, son." Lisa's messages evolved too. The initial pleas for forgiveness gave way to updates on her job search. Then news of a position she'd secured at a local boutique. Her final message mentioned enrolling in business classes at the community college. "I'm trying to be more like you," she admitted. "Practical, responsible. I never thanked you for keeping Dad afloat all these years. I should have seen what was happening and helped. I'm sorry, Brad." Meanwhile, my neighbor Mrs. Winters from 3 houses down from Dad's place, who had always treated me like a surrogate grandson, sent an email with updates about my father. "Your father has been different these past weeks," she wrote. "Quieter. He's been helping around the neighborhood, without being asked fixed my porch steps. Helped the Johnsons with their garden. He never mentions money. But I know things must be tight. He's selling his vintage sports memorabilia collection. Said it was time to let go of the past." The image of Dad parting with his prized possessions, the signed footballs, the framed jerseys, the trophies he had displayed so prominently hit me harder than expected. Those items had always represented his glory days, the achievements he had tried so desperately to relive through Lisa. 3 months after I left, Dad sent an email rather than a voicemail. It was formal, almost businesslike, but heartfelt. "I've secured the position at Wilson Manufacturing," he wrote. "Not as supervisor, they hired someone with more recent experience, but as a floor manager. The pay is less than I was making before, but it covers the basics. Lisa contributes to utilities and groceries from her boutique job. We're managing. Dr. Marshall has helped me understand some hard truths about myself. About how I transferred my sports failure onto you, expected you to want what I wanted. About how I idealized Lisa because she represented the success I thought I'd been denied. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't expect you to resume financial support. I just want you to know I'm working on myself. For the first time in my life, I'm trying to face who I really am, not who I pretended to be. He ended with a simple request. If you're ever ready, I'd like a chance to know my son. The real Bradford, not the one I tried to mold. I read the email several times, emotions conflicting within me. Part of me remained angry and hurt. Another part recognized the tremendous effort it must have taken for my proud father to write those words. Around the 6-month mark, I received a promotion to Director of Information Security at TechVision. The new role came with another substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities. During the celebration dinner with my team, Thomas raised his glass. To Bradford, he said, who taught me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is set boundaries. Later that night, slightly buzzed from champagne, I found myself scrolling through old family photos. Pictures of Dad coaching my Little League team before he gave up on my athletic potential. Mom sitting beside me at the computer, genuine interest on her face. Lisa and me as children, before the competition set in, building sandcastles at the beach. I wondered what Mom would advise if she were here. She had always believed in forgiveness, not as a gift to others, but as freedom for oneself. She had also believed in boundaries, in standing up for your worth. That night, I wrote a brief email to Dad, not committing to anything, not promising forgiveness, but opening a door that had been firmly closed. Congratulations on the job. I'm glad you and Lisa are figuring things out. It was small, but it was a start. 6 months turned into 7, then 8. Our communication remained minimal, but civil brief emails updating each other on major life events. Dad mentioned therapy regularly. Lisa shared news about her business classes and a small fashion blog she had started, more authentic than her previous social media presence. I told them about my promotion and the condo I was considering buying. Then, 9 months after our confrontation, an envelope arrived at my office via certified mail. Inside was a handwritten letter from Dad, 12 pages of his distinctive blocky handwriting. Unlike our digital communications, this was raw, personal, and clearly difficult for him to write. Dear Bradford, it began. Dr. Marshall suggested I write this letter as part of my therapy. He didn't insist I send it, but I realized these words needed to reach you, not just exist as an exercise. What followed was the most honest communication I had ever received from my father. He traced our relationship from my birth, his initial joy, his early pride, his growing confusion and disappointment, as I showed no interest in following his athletic path. He acknowledged how he had transferred his dashed professional sports dreams first onto me, then onto Lisa when I failed to fulfill them. I was living through my children instead of letting you live your own lives, he wrote. Your mother saw it. She called me out on it many times. After she died, there was no one to check my worst tendencies. He detailed how he had constructed elaborate fictions about Lisa's success, because he needed to believe his influence had produced something extraordinary. How he had dismissed my achievements, because they highlighted his own technological incompetence and made him feel obsolete. The monthly money you sent forced me to confront the hardest truth. My son, whom I had treated as less than, was actually more successful than I had ever been. Rather than take pride in that, I buried the knowledge beneath more lies. The letter continued with specific memories, times he had prioritized Lisa's events over mine, instances where he had diminished my accomplishments, moments where he had made me feel unwelcome in my own home. For each, he offered not excuses, but accountability. The final pages focused on his current journey. I am not the man I want to be yet, but I am no longer the man I was. Dr. Marshall says, change comes from honest self-assessment, followed by consistent, different choices. I'm trying to make those different choices now. He ended with a request. If you're willing, I'd like to meet somewhere neutral. Not my house with all its history. Not your city, where I'd feel even more out of place. Just father and son, trying to have an honest conversation for perhaps the first time. I read the letter 3 times that night. Then I called my own therapist, someone I had begun seeing shortly after returning to San Francisco, and scheduled an emergency session to process it. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop in Sacramento, halfway between our homes, waiting for my father. I had chosen a quiet corner table, ordered a black coffee that grew cold as I checked my watch repeatedly. Part of me expected him not to show, to revert to the pattern of disappointment I had grown accustomed to. Then he walked through the door, and my breath caught. This wasn't the larger-than-life figure of my childhood. This was an aging man, his shoulders slightly stooped, hair more gray than brown, lines etched deeply around his eyes. He scanned the room anxiously until his gaze landed on me, and for a moment I saw naked vulnerability in his expression before he composed himself. "Bradford," he said, extending his hand formally as he reached the table. "Thank you for meeting me." I stood and, bypassing his hand, gave him an awkward hug, our first in perhaps a decade. He stiffened in surprise, then returned the embrace with caution, as if afraid I might disappear. We sat across from each other, struggling with where to begin. I had rehearsed opening lines for days, but they all evaporated in the reality of his presence. "You look good," he said finally. "Successful. Thanks. You look." I paused, searching for honesty rather than platitude. "Different." He nodded, understanding the unspoken observation. "Aging and humility will do that." He attempted a smile. Plus, selling off all that memorabilia freed up space in the house and my head. "Mrs. Winters says the place looks 20 years younger. You're still in touch with Mrs. Winters? She brings me casseroles every Sunday. Says I'm too skinny now." He patted his considerably leaner midsection. "Between working on my feet all day and not drowning my feelings in beer every night, I've lost 30 pounds. Our conversation gradually warmed, moving from safe topics like neighborhood changes to deeper waters. He spoke about his therapy without embarrassment, crediting Dr. Marshall with saving my life by forcing me to actually live it instead of some fantasy version. I shared details about my work that I'd always assumed would bore him. To my surprise, he asked thoughtful questions, admitting when concepts went over his head but genuinely trying to understand. "I looked up what a director of information security actually does," he confessed. "Watched some videos trying to understand. It's still mostly gibberish to me, but I get that it's important, that you're protecting people. That's a good way to put it," I said, touched by the effort. The conversation eventually turned to the money I had sent, the deception that had sustained and ultimately fractured our relationship. "I should have questioned it," Dad said quietly. "Deep down, I think I knew. The timing was too convenient, the documentation too vague. But I wanted to believe the universe was rewarding me for my glory days, not that my son was silently saving me from my failures. I shouldn't have lied," I admitted. "I was enabling a dynamic that wasn't healthy for either of us." "Why did you do it? All those years, all that money?" I considered deflecting but chose honesty instead. "At first, it was because you needed help, and I could provide it. Later, I think I was still trying to earn your approval. If I could be the perfect son, successful enough to support you financially, yet humble enough not to demand recognition, maybe you'd finally see me." He winced at the truth of it. "I was so wrapped up in who I thought you should be that I completely missed who you actually were." As our second round of coffee arrived, the door to the cafe opened again, and Lisa appeared. Her presence had been part of our arrangement. She would join us midway through, allowing Dad and me some time alone first. Like Dad, she looked different. Gone were the designer clothes and carefully curated appearance. This Lisa wore simple jeans and a sweater. Hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, minimal makeup. She approached our table with visible apprehension. "Is this still okay?" she asked, hesitating. I nodded, and stood to hug her, another gesture that would have been unthinkable a year ago. As she settled into the third chair, the family circle was complete for the first time since my abrupt departure. Lisa didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need to apologize to you, Bradford. I knew you were supporting Dad. Not the specifics, but I suspected, and I let you carry that burden alone, while I pretended my life was perfect. Why? I asked simply. Because being the successful one was my identity. Dad's favorite. Mom's beauty. The Thompson who would make it big. She glanced at Dad, then back to me. When everything fell apart in New York, I couldn't face either of you as a failure. So I doubled down on the lie. We were all living lies, Dad said quietly. Me most of all. The conversation that followed was unlike any our family had ever had. Painful truths surfaced. Old wounds were acknowledged. Years of resentment, favoritism, and miscommunication laid bare on the cafe table alongside our empty coffee cups. I can't undo the past, Dad said eventually. I can't give you back the father you deserved, or the relationship we should have had. All I can do is try to be different, moving forward. And I can't be the perfect sister or daughter anymore, Lisa added. I need to find out who I actually am, not who everyone expected me to be. I looked at them both. These familiar strangers who shared my blood and history. I can't go back to how things were either. The financial support, the silence, the constant feeling of inadequacy. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be built on truth and respect. We left the cafe 4 hours after we arrived, having established not solutions but possibilities. New boundaries, new expectations. A tentative path forward, based not on fantasy, but on who we actually were. As we stood in the parking lot preparing to return to our separate lives, Dad cleared his throat. There's an event at Tech Vision next month, I said, anticipating his awkward goodbye. An innovation showcase where they're featuring my team's security protocol. If you wanted to come, his eyes widened slightly. I'd like that. Very much. We hugged again, less awkwardly this time. As I watched them drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in relation to my family for a very long time. Not resentment or obligation, but the faintest flicker of hope. 1 year after the confrontation that shattered our family's illusions, I stood at the window of my new condo, watching the San Francisco sunset paint the sky in dramatic oranges and pinks. So much had changed in 12 months, not just circumstances, but the fundamental ways we related to each other and ourselves. Dad had maintained his job at Wilson Manufacturing, gradually earning respect and even a modest promotion to shift supervisor. With my guidance, he had developed a realistic budget and learned to live within his means. The house had been refinanced with more favorable terms, reducing his monthly payment to something manageable on his salary. The most significant change, however, was his continuing therapy. What had begun as crisis management had evolved into genuine self-improvement. He called me every Sunday evening. Our conversations no longer dominated by comparisons or sports anecdotes, but instead filled with authentic exchanges: his challenges at work, my projects, books we'd both read on his therapist's recommendation. Lisa had completed her business certificate and, combining her fashion knowledge with newfound practical skills, secured a position managing a local boutique. She had moved into her own apartment, modest but entirely hers. Her social media now showcased her actual life rather than a fabricated one's smaller achievements, celebrated honestly, setbacks acknowledged without shame. She and I had developed a relationship that, while not incredibly close, was built on mutual respect rather than competition. We texted regularly, sharing professional advice and occasionally consulting each other on challenges. Last month, when she was developing a new inventory system for the boutique, she had actually asked for my input, a small gesture that would have been unimaginable in our previous dynamic. As for me, my career continued to thrive, but it no longer consumed me. I had found balance hiking on weekends with the group that had become genuine friends, dating again after years of focusing solely on work, even mentoring young programmers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Most importantly, I had learned to recognize my own worth, independent of external validation. The desperate need for my father's approval had diminished as I built a life aligned with my own values, rather than in reaction to his expectations. The innovation showcase I had invited Dad to had proven a turning point in our relationship. He had arrived early, dressed in a suit that hung slightly loose on his leaner frame, visibly nervous, but determined. Throughout the presentations, he had listened intently, asked colleagues thoughtful questions about my work, and stood with unmistakable pride when my team's security protocol was featured. Afterward, surrounded by tech industry leaders and innovation experts, he had approached me with uncharacteristic humility. I didn't understand half of what was presented, he admitted, but I understood that my son is respected and valued for his brilliant mind. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what everyone else clearly does. That moment, his genuine recognition of my achievements on their own terms, not compared to athletic prowess or his narrow definition of success, had begun the real healing between us. Now, as I prepared for another family milestone, I reflected on the lessons this painful journey had taught me. I had learned that supporting others from a place of resentment ultimately harms both parties. My financial assistance, while well-intentioned, had enabled Dad's denial and prolonged our dysfunctional patterns. True generosity required honesty and boundaries. I had discovered that family relationships, like all relationships, needed to be based on reality rather than wishful thinking or outdated roles. The moment we began seeing each other as actual people, flawed, complex, evolving rather than idealized versions or disappointments, genuine connection became possible. Perhaps most importantly, I had realized that standing up for myself wasn't selfish, but necessary, not just for my well-being, but for the health of our entire family system. My confrontation had initially felt like destruction, but had actually cleared the ground for something more authentic to grow. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. Sarah, my girlfriend of 6 months, an environmental lawyer I had met through the hiking group, arrived first, followed shortly by Thomas and his wife Emma. They were joining us for dinner before Dad and Lisa arrived tomorrow for the weekend visit. As I welcomed them in, my phone pinged with a text from Dad. Just checked into the hotel. Lisa gets in at 9. Still can't believe you're hosting the whole Thompson clan in your fancy city digs. Proud of you, son. The simple message, especially that final sentence, would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. Yet here we were, building something new from the ashes of what had burned away. The following evening, as we all gathered around my dining table, Dad and Lisa, Sarah, even Thomas and Emma, who had become honorary family members, I found myself overwhelmed by an unexpected sense of peace. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by genuine laughter. Dad listened more than he spoke. Lisa asked questions without competitive undertones. I shared stories without filtering out my accomplishments. Later, as Sarah and I cleaned up while the others enjoyed coffee on the balcony, she nudged me gently. "You okay?" "You got quiet there for a bit." I nodded, watching my father point out landmarks to Thomas, his gestures animated but no longer dominating the space. "I was just thinking about how sometimes the thing you need to say most is the thing you've been afraid to say your whole life. And once you say it," she prompted, "either everything falls apart or it gets rebuilt on a stronger foundation." I smiled at her. In my case, I got lucky. But it wasn't just luck. It was courage. The courage to break the silence, to disrupt comfortable lies, to demand recognition of my worth, the courage to walk away when necessary, and to return when genuine change occurred. The day I stopped seeking my father's approval was the day I truly became the man I was meant to be. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to stand up and say enough even to those we love the most. If my story resonated with you, please share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to family expectations? Did it lead to breakdown or breakthrough? Remember to like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding personal strength through difficult family dynamics. And thank you for joining me on this journey. May you find the courage to speak your own truths when the moment calls for it.